Hello, everyone. Thank you for your presence in this webinar, this new session of the Cave Show, in which we will follow rivers underground, and we will try to answer the question, are all caves carved by a river? Or it will not be us answering this question, but our invited speaker, to whom I will give the floor in a few minutes. But before, and thanking Dr. Jo de Velde for accepting his invitation, the invitation to be invited speaker in this webinar. I present myself. I'm Marta Santos. I'm a Science Communication Officer at the Center for Ecology, Evolution and Environmental Changes in Portugal. We are one of the organizers of the cave shows, which are webinars. It's a series of webinars that take place within the International Year of Caves and Karst, which is organized by the International Union of Speleology, of which we are partners. I invite you during this webinar to leave your questions and your comments on the YouTube live chat that you find on your right on the screen. And after his presentation, we will ask our invited speaker to answer some of the questions. And I will now give the floor without further delay to the person that is responsible for this idea of the cave show, Sofia. She's a researcher at the Center for Ecology, Evolution and Environmental Changes, and she was the one who had this idea of organizing cave shows. So, Sofia, this floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where on the world you are right now. Welcome to the 4th edition of the Cave Show, a series of online seminars about cave science, but most of all about our passion for caves. I am thrilled and honored to present our edition today. We are going to follow that river underground, a scientific perspective about how caves and speleology are dealt within the geological community. When our speaker sent us the abstract of his talk, he wrote, "Karst scientists are still seen as crazy people having fun getting dirty in the mud, and caves and karst are still not being taken seriously enough. Cavers and cave scientists have to let the whole community, scientific and not, know about the importance of karst in many fields, practical and scientific. This is indeed the aim of our show." I will now give the floor to Professor Stein Erik Lauritzen from the University of Bergen in Norway that will present our guest tonight. Please unmute yourself, Stein Erik. Thank you.
Okay, just a little slip of thing. Hello, everybody. I have the great pleasure of presenting my old friend, Professor Jo de Waele, who is tonight's speaker. You graduated in geology at the University of Ghent in Belgium, but he made his PhD in mineral prospection at the Department of Engineering, Geology and Environmental Techniques of the University of Cagliari in Italy. He is currently full professor in physical geography and geomorphology at the Department of Biological, Geological and Environmental Sciences of the University of Bologna, alma mater in Italy. Jo is specialized in speleogenesis, karst geomorphology and hydrogeology, and paleoclimate studies in karst areas. And the results of his researches have been published in more than 200 scientific papers since 1993. Jo is the scientific coordinator of the Caves Astronaut Training Course of the European Space Agency since 2011. And he has also since 2005 been editor of the International Journal of Speleology. And he is on an editorial board member of Geomorphology. And he is a very nice guy as well and a good friend of me. So the audience is your Jo, please.
Thanks, Stein Erik. I'm sharing my screen. Wait a bit. Okay. Now, yeah, I heard a lot of titles. That's me, yes, but I'm a caver, first of all. And I'm very proud to be here, to be invited. I mean, as I wrote down in my introduction to Anna, I said I was a little bit of fool professor, not a fool professor, a fool professor. I am a caver, I'm a crazy caver. And that's how many people in the geological world still see us. We are a bit crazy guys. Today I'm going to give a strange talk, which the title already is very strange. It's Let's Follow That River Underground. Are all caves carved by rivers? And I'm going to explain why I thought of this subject and I want to talk about it. Now, I started caving when I was 18 years old. I really didn't start doing this because of my passion for caves. I started doing this because a friend of mine, he knew that I was studying geology in my first years. He said, you're studying geology. No, why don't you organize a caving trip? Which is a strange way of starting caving, you know? So I started caving in this way. So I found cavers and I organized a caving trip, and I went to the south of Belgium, and I went into very nasty, narrow, wet and muddy passages, and I fell in love. It's very easy. That's how I started caving. Now, that's something that comes back a lot of times. If they hear that I am a geologist, normal people, they immediately start thinking about the nice things of geology. They talk about minerals, diamonds. They talk about fossils, dinosaurs, and they talk about caves. I don't know if you saw this, but many people, normal people, when they think about geology, one of the things that pop up in their mind is you're an explorer. You go underground, no? Because it's nice, a cave is nice. By the way, many of the geo sites, the most important tourist geological sites in the world are caves, by the way. So it's not a miracle. The strange thing that is in 4 years of study in Ghent, which is in the Flanders, the flat part of Belgium, none of my professors ever talked to me about caves and karst. So I did a geology degree and I came out as a geologist. I would have known nothing about caves if I weren't a caver, which is crazy. Now in the Flanders, it's far away from caves, far, 100 kilometers from the nearest cave. I can understand this. But this is the case in many places, in many universities worldwide. In geology courses, they never talk about caves. It's not an interesting thing. Although they don't, normal people, they find it interesting. I mean, university professors, no. And during my caving career, another strange thing that happens to all cavers is that when you go caving with these old cavers, with these senior cavers, they tell you that your goal as a caver is to follow rivers. No? Is this true? I don't know. The cavers, in fact, they always say, okay, cave, what is it? It's a river going down, sinking rivers. Or what is it? It's a river rising from the mountain. That's caves. So caves are formed by rivers. That's an equation. So I went looking into all the books I found in Italy. No, these are American, English, Italian, Spanish, French books, whatever, to see what they tell about caves to secondary schools, to high schools, to universities, and in the caving courses, to see what is being done wrong in these books. And it was surprising. I mean, look at these two books. This is a book, the first one, Physical Geography, is an American book, you know. 720 pages of science, one half of page dedicated to caves and karst. It's incredible. Global Geomorphology, Sommerfeld, that's a famous book for geomorphologists. In this book, almost nothing. There's the same 1 or 2 pages out of 700. I mean, it's crazy. Introducing Physical Geography, 3 pages out of 720. So they don't talk about caves. If you look at the drawings they use, they often, in the first one as well, you see a cave is depicted, is shown as a river that goes underground and comes out in the valley floor. That's a cave. The right one is Earth's system. That's the same. There's 7 pages in a very big book, and the same scheme of a cave, a river carving, and a cave level forming and deepening. Rivers all the time. These are American books. This is getting a bit better. Process Geomorphology. 26 pages, 1 chapter, dedicated to karst and caves. In the North American literature and books, often this is what they do. This is the Canadian book, okay? And this has a chapter of 28 pages. You see already the model of Forden Ewers. This is the four system model, no? Which is typical. The same in the Bloom book, Geomorphology, another chapter on caves. So in America, I would say in North America, it's a bit better than in Europe. This is another one, Easterbrook, another complete chapter on caves and karst, okay? They always talk about caves formed by rivers, by water going underground. But in some of these books, you see something also about hypogenic karst. So caves not made by water, by rivers going underground. But there's most of the time, that's really half a page. Books, general books on caves and karst, they always show rivers, pictures, and drawings in which you see waterfalls, you see rivers, and you see river sediments. So caves are always rivers. Books by kids, same stuff. This is a book, Italian book, that shows you how a cave forms. So you have the dolines, the waterfalls going into the cave, the river flowing through the cave, the river coming out of the cave. So it's always rivers. Les mystères de la résurgence. This is French book, Découvrir les grottes. In the cover, you see the waterfall and the river and the stalagmites and the cave are going down a shaft. So that's the typical way in which most scientists and cavers and normal people see caves. Same thing here. That's another French book, typical French book with rivers and waterfalls and whatever. Caving literature is more or less the same. I took from the library in Bologna, we have a very big library, which is one of the UIS libraries in the world. So we have a lot of books. I took some of the books, for example, a famous book by Martel, by the way, on cavernes et les rivières souterraines de la Belgique. So in the title, we have the rivières souterraines, which has been taken in 2016 for the new edition, not Martel, of course. The same, des rivières souterraines de Wallonie, which is the south part of Belgium. In Italy, I fiumi della notte, the rivers of the night. That's a book on caves, okay? Or the Palawan, the River of Swallows, which is the book on the Puerto Princesa Underground River National Park in the Philippines. Of course, that's a cave made by a river. It's good to give them a title in which we have the river. I mean, you have it over there. Skocianskie Jama. So this is the Reka River going underground in Slovenia in the classical karst. That's more or less where karst has started to be studied by many people a long time ago, 150 years ago. There you see a very big river, the Reka, going underground and disappearing completely in this very big and beautiful cave. It has an underground canyon of 3 kilometers long, and then it disappears in the sump. It comes out in Trieste Gulf, that's about 50, 60 kilometers away from here in the Adriatic Sea. So that's a very big cave that is used in many places as the typical karst situation. So you have this big river going underground, mysterious. No? And I don't know where it passes. We don't even know now where it passes, because we have found this river in many places between Reka, between Skocianskie Jama and Timavo. I think there's 6 or 7 caves that reach the Timavo underground, but we don't have the complete path of this underground river. So mysterious. French, La Spéléologie, Francis Le Guen, famous French caver. Grottes gouffres, avennes et rivières souterraines, les comprendre, les explorer. So here again in France, rivers, most of them. And that's also due to the fact that very big and important cave systems in France have big rivers flowing through them. That's not always true. So what we learn out of most of the literature we have seen now, which is not a specialized one, the books like Speleogenesis or the Ford and Williams and the Palmer books, which I will be talking about later, they of course know that there's many ways in which a cave can be forming. But in normal books, general books, it is always depicted as a cave being made by rivers, by underground water flowing, okay? And flowing fast. You see it always drawn and depicted in this way. And that's what most cavers think. I mean, if you go to a normal caving club in which you have all kinds of people doing caving, I mean, they're not scientists, they're passionate lovers of mud and the underground wet environments of caves. They think about caves as being made by water that is flowing underground, okay? Which is a typical idea, which is probably only partial. It's not really correct all the times. And we will see this in a moment. So caves, underground rivers, that's the nice pictures we can see in many books about caving. A nice caving book has to have a nice picture of a big river underground, wild, okay? Only the Lechuguilla cave book couldn't do this because there's no rivers in Lechuguilla. So that's already a big example of a big cave in which you can't place a picture of a big river. You don't have it. It simply doesn't exist. But most of the time they exist. And cavers, they are depicted sometimes as the painters of rivers. We are going underground, or not even underground. You can throw it in a river that is sinking underground. We place dye tracing, dyes, so the fluorescein, uranina, or the rhodamina on the right. These are big colors that we place in this underground water to see, to trace the waters and to see where it runs through and where it runs to, at which spring this water will be coming out. So that is something that cavers are doing a lot of times to understand the hydrology of a karst system. And normally it works. I mean, many cave systems, of course, are made by water infiltrating underground and flowing from the sinking holes or the recharge areas to the springs, but it's not always like this. There's many caves in which it is difficult to explain the genesis by rivers. I mean, and we will come to that in a moment. Specialized literature, but it's a bit better. I took this from a bookshelf of Mladen Garasic's Facebook webpage with a nice couple of scientific books, sinkholes and whatever. One of the big books that has been printed in 2000 was the Speleogenesis book by Klimchuk and others. It was a book that brought together a lot of scientists of 20, 25 years ago. Stein Erik was one of them. And they wrote about how caves form and the link between geomorphology and hydrology and cave genesis, of course. And you would say, okay, in a book like this, it will be all about rivers. No, there's a lot in this book that isn't talking about rivers. So in the cave science world, it was something that is well known. I mean, in the last, I would say 30 years at least, there has been a big jump in speleogenesis, in thinking about cave formation. And you see here, I have to go back. There's a lot of these on the right side here, of these cave examples, like Black Hills caves in Siberia. There's the hydrothermal caves written by Dubliansky. There's the Guadalupe Mountains. These are all cave systems, and of course Ukraine, all cave systems that are not made by cave rivers. They're made in a different manner, in many different ways. I mean, it's well described in different chapters in this book, which is rather complicated because it's very technical. It all starts from this damn chemistry, of course, if we talk about limestone. So we have this calcium carbonate that goes into solution, consuming CO2 that goes into solution as well, carbonic acid. And that's more or less the lesson that they give you in university, if at all they give you a lecture on karst, okay? They would show you a figure like this, more or less. In caving courses all over the world, old cavers would explain more or less this. They wouldn't show you probably the gypsum stuff. I mean, gypsum doesn't need carbon dioxide to be dissolved, for example. They wouldn't surely talk about the dissolution of salt or the dissolution of quartz sandstones. They normally will talk about this limestone dissolving with this very complicated mechanism and chemistry, because it looks pretty easy for a normal chemist, but it can be really complicated. In fact, it's not only water and CO2, for example, if you think about it. I love this picture especially because it shows a Karren field somewhere in the Jura, in which you see all these small rivulets, these small Karren channels that are coming together in a big one, no? Because karst is very complicated. There's many different ways of creating acidity and the dissolving power of water. So I put a list, but it's not even complete. I mean, if at all in caving communities, they will be talking about the mixing or Bögli effect, which is already something pretty complicated, I would say, for a normal non-geologist. But this is normally explained. And it's an effect that is probably a bit overestimated. It is active for sure. It can, in some places, even correspond to 10% of more dissolution of limestone, but you really need big differences in CO2, initial CO2 in the two waters that are mixing. So it's overestimated, but it's surely in the long term, in geological time, it is effective, especially in deep environments, I would say, far from the surface, but not only. Then we have the salt fresh water mixing phenomena, which is well known. That's the flank margin cave development in the Bahamas, for example. But there's many other places where this happens, and it has been described. There's the biological action that works a lot and can create conditions of dissolving. I mean, it can cause the formation of CO2, but it can cause formation of different acids. It changes pH. It does a lot of stuff in the chemistry world. So the microbiology world has to be investigated, and many people are doing this, especially in very strange rocks like the iron formation caves, for example, or the quartzite caves. It seems that microbes are really important in boosting the dissolution. Then we have organic acids. We have the thermal waters, the speleogenesis by rising deep thermal waters, sulfuric acid speleogenesis. Then we have condensation and evaporation, which are processes occurring in the arid environment of caves, which is largely underestimated by cavers. In many caves, the walls can retreat for meters only because of condensation corrosion, especially in tropical places, especially in places where you have big thermal differences between air masses. So in thermal caves especially, but also close to a tropical sea, for example. And then we have erosion, sedimentation, freezing, air currents, a lot of stuff. It's really complicated explaining speleogenesis. And I understand why in universities and in caving courses, we don't go into this complexity because it's really, it becomes complicated. The Ford and Williams book, for example, divides, you see below the classification of karst solution caves, divides already, that's 10 years, more than 10, 15 years ago, the caves in normal meteoric water caves, the deep enriched water caves, and the brackish water caves, which is what I was talking about before. And we see that they say 80% of the known caves are normal branchwork caves by normal meteoric waters. So these would be the normal river caves. I guess that this 80% probably will have to go down a bit because we are seeing a real expansion of discoveries of caves that were thought to be made by rivers and flowing underground water that are made by different mechanisms more and more. There's people that are really in love with hypogenic karst and they see hypogenic karst everywhere. That would be an exaggeration, but I think many caves are hypogenic and we still don't know about it. Then we have, of course, the thermal caves, the Carlsbad type cavities. These are the sulfuric acid caves like Lechuguilla and so on. So already Ford and Williams talks very clearly about these things. And also the Palmer book, which is probably the most accessible book for cavers, Cave Geology. I love this book, by the way. He also talks about a lot of types of cave formation. He divides the caves, by the way, in caves using two schemes, like the structural and lithological situation in the beginning, so the dominant type of porosity, and then the dominant type of recharge, if it is concentrated, diffuse, or even different sinkholes or sinking streams and all this kind of things. He describes it very nicely in a sort of box in this book, Interpretation of Cave Origin. And if you see the titles, he divides them in caves made by sinkhole recharge. So that's a diffuse recharge. Floodwater recharge, that's a sinking river. Diffuse seepage from above or from below. Seacoast mixing. The rising thermal water. Sulfuric acid caves. These are the big classes. And then there's the chapter deep-seated mixing processes, of which we don't really know a lot, but that are increasingly becoming important, especially in the petroleum industry, because these are the voids that can contain petroleum, and these are made deep beneath our feet, so far away from hypogenic recharge. So other acids, the most important are sulfuric acids. Many caves have been discovered worldwide in which sulfuric acid has been responsible at a certain stage of cave formation. This is a model of, for example, taken from a publication of Galdensi, Frasassi Cave, which is one of the best studied examples in the world. That's in Italy. But there's many other caves like this, especially in the Guadalupe Mountains, where they started studying and understanding these mechanisms better a long time ago. I think it was in the 80s by Carol Hill and other people. Before her, it was Egemeyer in the United States of America that started talking about the importance of sulfuric acid in forming voids underground. There's many ways of creating this sulfuric acid. Normally it comes from the oxidation of H2S It's a gas that is soluble, but of course, when it comes into an arid environment, it goes out of solution, becomes a gas, can go back into the condensation water or back into the water table and oxidizes if there is oxygen in the place, in the cave or in the environment where it comes out. This is a very, very effective and very efficient method of making voids. Many very big, large and big cave systems have been formed by this mechanism. The H2S normally comes from very deep tiers or levels of gypsum that are reduced in the presence normally of organic substances. So petroleum or hydrocarbon reservoirs that capture the oxygen, so they keep the environment reducing enough to have the formation of H2S with bacteria intermediating in this process. So there's a lot of bacteria working in these deep environments, creating H2S. This is a famous cave, Lechuguilla. You know the pictures, of course. So that's a very big cave system in which sulfuric acid has been responsible for almost everything we see. The gypsum is one of the things that shows you that this might be a sulfuric acid cave system. It's not enough to find gypsum to be a sulfuric acid cave. There's many other things that have to be found as scientific evidence. In Italy, it's full. I mean, Italy is a sort of paradise for sulfuric acid caves. We have a very special setting in which we have the mountain chain, which is in the central backbone of Italy, the Apennines. These are very deep faults, deep-rooted faults that go down down to the bottom of the Jurassic sequences. Below the Jurassic sequences, we have the gypsum of Triassic age. These are reduced because we have also hydrocarbons deep in these carbonatic successions of the Apennines. And this combination makes it very easy for H2S to be formed deep in the crust and to be brought to the surface through the very deep fractures that bound many of these small isolated massives, carbonate massives in the Apennines. So we see there's over 26 places today in Italy in which we have sulfuric acid cave systems. Some of them are very big, like Frasassi, Montecucco, just to mention a couple of them. This is a paradise. The Americans come to Italy to study sulfuric acid caves, by the way. Frasassi is studied especially by Jan McAlady of Penn State University. How can we recognize them? There's a lot of morphologies in caves that we can find, like the feeders that originally made the thermal sulfuric waters rise into the cave environment. We find gypsum, of course. What we especially find is these small replacement pockets is the name. These are very typical of sulfuric acid caves. We can find also bubble trails. So these are traces of CO2 bubbles coming out of the water in phreatic environments. And along the trace of the bubble along the roof, there's a sort of carving of this small channel, which is called a bubble trail. Sulfuric notches, especially these replacement pockets. So these very sort of Swiss cheese morphologies in the rock, which are pretty typical of a sulfuric acid caves, especially if we find in the same cave gypsum and sulfur sometimes. So the nice yellow cave, this is Santa Cesarea Terme in south of Italy, in which the whole cave is completely yellow. If you go in there with a carbide lamp with a flame on it, you can get burned completely because it would take fire. And then also these vermiculations, so these sort of snotite, very ugly, disgusting things hanging from the wall, which are biovermiculations, because the sulfur in the cave, the presence of a lot of sulfur in the cave makes microbes, sulfur bacteria thrive very well in these environments. You can look at sulfur isotopes in the gypsum and the sulfur, and this tells you very clearly that there has been a bacterial reduction of sulfate that brought sulfur, H2S, into the cave, and that is a real sulfuric acid cave. There's plenty of them all over the world. Another way of making cave is the coastal mixing corrosion, the flank margin caves. There's, if you look at it, it seems very easy. I mean, you have salt water dense below, you have fresh water on top of it. The mixing between these two waters creates an aggressive solution because the ions are counting less in the solution. But in reality, it's a little bit more complicated. I mean, there's two mixing zones. There's the one below between salt and fresh water. And there's the one on top of the freshwater lens where you have the infiltrating water that has a CO2 content that goes and mixes with the standing freshwater lens that is in the aquifer. And often there's a mixing in that interface as well. Where the two interfaces, the mixing interfaces, the upper and the lower one, are getting together, which is close to the coastline, you have the best experience of dissolution and of void formation. These caves often don't have an entrance to the sea, so they're not made by waves, they're not made by running waters. It's a diffuse flow, it's very, very slowly flowing water. It's mixing corrosion by fresh and salt water or fresh and fresh water, so the Broglie effect. And they form very close to the sea level, of course. The Bahamas is full of it. Most of the caves in the Bahamas are made by this type of mechanism. Here you have very young and porous limestone, so the aquifer can be penetrating a bit everywhere into the porous openings in the rock. Where the mixing occurs, you have the boosting of the dissolution and you have the void forming. So these caves are normally completely isolated from the outside. They only get breached later when the coast retreats or the surface lowers. Then you can get into them and see how big they are. So this is a big one-hatched bay cave in Eleuthera in the Bahamas. In Italy, we have a lot of them. So a typical morphology of these caves is are the notches and the pillars and these sort of Swiss cheese morphologies, the smooth walls, and especially the ratio between the horizontal extent of the cave system and the vertical one. So they extend more or less along the water table, along the mixing zone of the time when they were forming. You can be sure that it was in a seacoast mixing caves or flank margin cave when you find speleothems inside them. These speleothems grow after the cave has formed, but the cave can maybe be submerged again by the sea. So you see this stalagmite that has been cut, of course, and you see these boreholes, which are bore mussels. So this was a sea environment that have carved their way through it. And then it grew again and then went back in underwater again. Did this many times. So this was surely a flank margin cave with this type of morphology. Of course, they're close to the sea, not always, but most of the time. If they are very old, they can show you where the sea level and the coastline more or less was. So it's interesting to understand how they form, where they can form. These are very interesting objects of study for the petroleum industry because these fringes of cave environments, of cave formation bands can be very extensive. They can follow an ancient coastline for hundreds of kilometers. And this porosity is very big and can host a lot of petroleum, a lot of hydrocarbons. So this is one of the targets of petroleum industry, especially. This is Cueva Santa Catalina in Cuba. It's a flank margin cave, like the Belamar cave, which is on the side of this one. Very extensive horizontally, different levels. They can allow you to reconstruct the sea level history, so the changes of sea level, and how the territory, the island or the coastline has gone up or down respect to the sea level going up and down during the climate changes of the Quaternary. So many people are working in these caves, dating speleothems, especially the phreatic overgrowths on these speleothems, to try and reconstruct the situation of the past of sea level and of its position. Thermal caves. Now, the typical locality of thermal caves is Budapest. There have been studied since the 60s, but they talk about it even more than a century ago of these caves. There were very strange caves with very small entrances, with very strange speleothems. These are folia, the upper picture. These are raft cones. These are not exclusive to thermal caves, but they are very typical of thermal caves. So many caves in Budapest have or folia or cave rafts, cones, or raft cones, or both of them. You can do some studies on stable isotopes, on fluid inclusions in these calcites. You have calcite spars, so big crystals growing underwater in thermal water. You can analyze them and be sure they were formed by thermal water. To really be sure it's a thermal cave is not an easy task, because it can also be normal caves that have been invaded by thermal water and not formed by the thermal water. But in some cases, it has been possible to see that they were really made by thermal water rising from below. The typical plan shape of these systems is a maze network, because thermal water, of course, passes in all the openings it finds in the carbonate rock. So it dissolves gradually and more or less equally all the passages, all the fractures, and all the openings it finds, and makes a sort of maze cave system. Most of the caves in Budapest are like this. There's many other caves in the world like this. This is still in Budapest, not in Budapest, in Hungary. Satorkopusta Barlang. The typical, one of the typical morphologies, not exclusive, but typical in thermal caves are these cupola, so these rounded spherical blind ending passages, which were believed to be made in underwater situations, but in many places and in many cases, it's also a subaerial, if not exclusively subaerial phenomenon. So it's condensation corrosion above a water table. These notches as well are very typical. This is in one of the Budapest caves. These are calcite rafts that have fallen on the floor, and then the passage has formed below it. So now they form the roof of this cave in Palvolgi Cave in Budapest. Thermal caves in Italy as well. They're very nice caves to explore, because if you find the thermal water, you can get a nice bath and you can jump into 37 degrees water, which is very nice to do in a cave environment. This is, by the way, a thermal spa, so people pay to get in here to get filthy with mud like cavers do, but they pay for it. And there's other places like this in the world where thermal caves are used as thermal spas. So for older people like us, Tainerik, to go and relax. This is in Mexico, one of the submarine caves where you see these very big raft cones. And in this case, there's thermal water rising up in the cenote. But these are very strange situations. Some of them are thermal caves as well. Diffuse recharge from above, that's a very strange type of making a cave. A very big cave system in Australia is Bulita Cave, is formed in this way. It's a maze system. It is formed by water infiltrating very diffusely from above through a permeable cover. It was a dolomite and a sandstone and siltstone layers on top. and it has formed, I don't know how long it is, it's 120 kilometers of cave passages, if I'm not wrong. Clark's Cave in America is another example. So you see these typical cave maze patterns, which are very typical and very similar to the ones that are made by diffuse recharge from below. These are in limestone, like Boltovskaya Cave in Russia. It's a very impressive maze system that is made by water coming from an underlying sandstone layer, driving upwards through a fractured limestone layer. So it's very strange. Kalahurut Cave in Iran, we have Chariton Cave in Israel, we have Cave of the Winds in the US. Many examples. The pictures show Krempuri Cave in India, in Meghalaya, the northern part of India. That's an incredible maze system of, I think, 34 kilometers of development now. And it's made by water coming from below, from a sandstone layer into this 2-meter thick layer of limestone, and has carved this very strange and extremely stressful network of very small galleries. You get lost immediately. If you don't go with a good guide, you get lost. Below in gypsum, diffuse recharge from below in gypsum is very well known, has been described by Alexander Klimchuk a long time ago. These are the typical hypogene artesian systems in gypsum. So here it's a limestone bed feeding the gypsum bed from below. So you need an artesian aquifer. You have a recharge, which is from far away sometimes, driven through an aquifer, sandwiched, and the gypsum is sandwiched between these two limestone beds that act as the aquifers that bring in and out the water that flows through the gypsum. So this is a transverse speleogenesis, making these amazing networks. These are the biggest cave systems in the world, by the way, in gypsum. Condensation corrosion is something that is often missed by a lot of cavers. Look at the picture to the right especially. You see this wavy roof. The cavers, normally they say, okay, this is a phreatic passage. It also has a keyhole cross-section, which is typical of phreatic passages that has become vados afterwards. Nothing to do with this. This is a passage that goes down for 250 meters, straight down at 40 degrees angle. A phreatic passage going down for 250 meters like this needs really a very big recharge area. This is simply air. So this is a thermal system in which the thermal aquifer below fed the cave system by air, warm air flowing on the roof, condensing. The condensing water was flowing along the roof, dissolving completely. When it came down, it came across the cold air that came back because it cooled down at the end of its travel. There was evaporation, and you have these popcorn coralloids forming below in the passage. So in fact, you have a sort of transfer of calcite from the top of the passage to calcite below in the passage. Strange type of speleogenesis. We are sure it works like this, but it was never described before, and it's really not considered by cavers. I have seen caves in which you have very thin and subtle layers of insoluble rock sticking out of the limestone for even up to 30 or half a meter distance. A big river of flowing water would have brought away everything, would have eroded these thin sheets of paper. Now, they're still there, meaning it's the air carving the cave. And I think it's underestimated in many places. Another thing that often is not seen very well by cavers especially is the paragenesis or anti-gravitative erosion. So you have to think about a phreatic conduit. You see it on top. This is the normal way of making a keyhole passage. So you have the water, it was filled with water, so it makes a sort of cylindrical conduit. Then the water becomes less, so it's not filling everything. It starts carving a canyon down, and it makes a keyhole passage. That's one of the ways of making a keyhole passage. If you go down and you see the schemes below, you have the sediment filling up the lower part of the passage. The sediment is shielding the carbonate or the soluble rock below. So the water, the only way of carving into the rock is carving upwards. It makes a sealing channel going up until it's completely phreatic. When it ends the phase, it will carve away the whole sediment series and it will leave a sort of canyon-like passage. Cavers see this and they often say, this is the first phreatic conduit, and then it went down, carving downward. In many places, it's the way around. The old passage is the one below. The old passage is this one, and it carved upwards, and then it was empty. So this is something that is often not really easy to recognize, but there's different ways of doing this, and you need to recognize it. And I think it's very common in many caves to find this type of speleogenesis, especially in gypsum caves, of course, because it's fast, but also in limestone caves, you find it very easily. A very good example of this is Mammuthöhle in Austria, in the Dachstein Mountains. You have a very big gallery. It's too big to be filled with water completely, because you would need a sort of Amazon River to flow through that cave system. An Amazon River in that cave system never was present, so it had to be paleogenesis. And you see the signs of the paleogenesis in the gallery itself. I'm talking about Paleotraun Passage is the name in Mammuthöhle. And this explains much better the size of these very big passages. Another example is the Saint-Marcel cave in the Ardèche in France, where this has been explained, coupled with the Mycenaean salinity crisis, by the way. So it's very much more complicated than this, but paleogenesis is underestimated. So what I said and what I thought is, if I think about me 20 years ago, or even only 10 years ago, I thought I knew it all. The caves were made by rivers, no? So I thought I had it all right, and I was wrong. I started traveling. I started especially going into caves with very expert people. I mean, a lot of friends of mine, older than me, they taught me about caves. I mean, going with Arthur Palmer, Derek Ford, Paul Williams, Stein-Erik Lauritzen, Philippe Audra, which is already a bit younger, Lucas Plan, and many, many, many other people, Jose Maria Calafora. And you go into caves, into their caves, and you hear them explain things. Then you realize that in your home country, you've seen a lot of things that are similar to this. You go back to your old caves and you say, Jesus, why didn't I see this before? I mean, you just understand this only by going with the right people into the caves, by traveling a lot and making a lot of experience and reading all these things in the books, but you have to find the right books, as you've seen before. If you take the wrong books, they only talk about rivers and nothing else. I played a bit with this sort of thing of rivers, river caves. Of course, this sample is biased. I mean, I took the 11 longest caves in the world, and it's easy to find in internet. I took the list and I said, okay, let's see if these were carved by rivers. Of course, hypogenic caves in which water is carving every available opening from the beginning and making maze cave systems. Of course, they are longer caves, no? So it's a biased sample of caves, but it's interesting to see that from these 11 caves, Mammoth Cave is a river cave, no doubt about it. It has been dated by allogenic river sediments. Dos Ojos Actum in Mexico is a flank margin cave. We could say there's a river in this one as well. There's many rivers coming inside in the Yucatan Peninsula, but most of the caves in this area, especially in the coastal fringe, in the first 2 kilometers from the coast, are mainly made by mixing corrosion. Jewel Cave, it's very difficult to give it a name. I cannot call this a true thermal cave as it has been published before, because it has a very long history and there's a lot of mechanisms overprinting each other, but surely it never has seen a river inside. It's a complex, multi-stage, thermal mixing and whatever other type of mechanism cave. Jewel Cave is like this, and also Wind Cave, which will come later, is the same. Oxbelha in Mexico is like Sac Actun, quindi Flank Margin Cave. Optimisticna, Ukraine, is an artesian basal injection cave, so it's not a river cave, no river inside. Shuangedong, the longest cave in China, is an epigenic river cave, of course. There's the big river still flowing inside, no doubt about it. Wind Cave in Dakota, I told you about. It's a complex multi-stage, it's like Jewel Cave in the Black Hills. Lechuguilla Cave, talked about it, a sulfuric acid cave, no rivers at all. You can't take a picture of a river in Lechuguilla. Clearwater Cave, you can only take pictures of rivers. You've seen this one, Stein Erik, I guess, so I didn't, I have to go there. But that's a river cave for sure. Holoch Cave, call it a true river cave, is a little bit too much. It's an alpine cave. It's made by the lot of rivers, very small ones coming in together. I mean, there's a lot of flooding going on in this cave system. So a lot of the carving of the voids is done by rising floodwaters. It's not really a river, but let's say it's a river cave as well, this one. A lot of rivers. Fisher Ridge Cave, that's in the Mammoth Cave area, so it's an epigenic river cave. So you've seen this 11 caves, more than half of them, 6, were no river caves. Said, okay, I'm gonna play more. I went looking to the famous Italian caves. These are the caves of the Italian Show Cave Association. We have about 20 caves in this association, a little bit more, I guess. I looked at them and said, okay, Bosea, which is in the northern part of the Alps, I would say. It's a cave with a river inside still today. It's a complex history because there's a lot of erosion going on in this cave, but it's a river cave. Grotta del Vento, Apuan Alps in the Marble Caves. That's a river cave as well. You still have the river inside. Epigenic river caves are also Pertosa, Grotta dell'Angelo, which is in Campania, the Alburni Massif, the Corchia Cave system, which is the same area of the Grotta del Vento. But if you go looking better, Toirano Cave, Liguria, the guides, they were talking always about a river carving this cave. No river involved at all. We went looking for alluvial sediments. We went looking to the morphology in general of this cave system. It has nothing to do with caves, rivers. It has to do with rising thermal water and rising air. Sure about it. We published this recently. Is Dusk Cave one of the most interesting and important caves in Sardinia? It's not made by caves, by cave rivers. It's made by, it's a network of fractures, has been enlarged by mixing corrosion. Simple mixing corrosion, nothing else. If you go around this cave, you don't find pebbles, you don't find alluvial sediments, there's nothing. Sorry. Castellana Cave, the most famous cave in Italy. Go to the guides, they talk to you about the sinkhole, that's a big shaft, the entrance. The river went in from that shaft. It's a simple collapse shaft, it's nothing else. There's no river in there. And then it flows through 3 kilometers of cave system. And then in the end of the gallery, they say that's the place where the river went down. And it went through right to the Ionian Sea, which is in Taranto. That's about 40 kilometers from here. No river at all. That's a mixing cave as well. And they still continue talking about rivers. There's no sign of rivers in this cave. And that's a big one. Worse, sorry, Grotta Gigante. Grotta Gigante is Trieste. Trieste means Reka Timavo. That's a river cave. Of course it is. If you go to Gigante Cave, there's no river. The river is somewhere down there. I don't know where. Maybe not even below the big room, which is Gigante Cave. This cave is formed by the rising of floodwaters. That's the water table rising. I don't know if the river is down there. It can be nearby, but probably it's not even down there. And the rising water, the floodwater, makes a lot of things in the air, which is compressed and decompressed in the chambers that lie above the water table. So you have a lot of condensation corrosion going on in this place. If you do this for a long time, you make big rooms. In the whole cave, you don't find sediments. You don't find any sign of erosion by rivers. So it's not directly related to a river. Crazy. Frasassi Cave is sulfuric acid cave. Sinsulusa Cave is a flank margin cave. It's on the coastline. No river at all. And they still talk about rivers. Borgo Verezzi, Liguria, it's another cave that is close to the coastline. It's a mixing cave, coastal mixing. It's a flank margin cave. So if you look at all these caves, all these tourist caves in Italy, if you go as a tourist, all the guides will talk to you about cave is formed by the rivers and the waters flowing on the ground and carving the void. And afterwards, you have the speleothems forming. At least half of them is not true. They should change their stories. They should change their stories. Are you kidding, you would say? Most of cavers would say you're nuts. I mean, I'm crazy. I'm saying stupid things. Maybe I am, I don't know. But the truth is that cavers often don't have this kind of view. They don't read the big books by Arthur Palmer or Ford and Williams or the big speleogenesis book of the National Speleological Society. That's too big. They don't read this. They listen to the old cavers, and the old cavers will say, yeah, they're made by rivers. It's not true. So what is the take-home message of all this story I did? That there's not enough communication. There's not enough communication in many ways. I mean, if you look at the university level, my colleagues at university, they don't know anything about caves and karst. No one told them, and they don't have the time to read this. And we have never communicated this to the karst to the scientists, the normal geologists, I mean. So the karst scientists are not good enough in communicating, I would say. That's awful. Now, karst scientists, they have a sort of alibi. Many, if I talk to my colleagues, they talk to me and they say I'm crazy, which is true. Because I go into the mud and I crawl into the mud because I love it. That's true, because I'm crazy. Huh? But that's something that is generally thought about cavers and cave scientists. I don't know if Stein Erik has the same experience, but if I talk to my colleague geochemist, he would say, I'm crazy. I'm having fun. I'm not doing science. I travel the world and I go into these silly small holes and I go and explore. And I'm wasting time. That's what they think. Talk to any paleontologist, geochemist, geologist, whatever. I think that's something that's coming, no? So it's a little bit not our fault, this. That's how the way they see us. We are a bit crazy. Yeah, maybe it's true. But this makes it true that karst caves are not taken seriously enough. especially in the professional geology world, especially in Europe. I don't know how the situation in America is, but in Europe, if someone needs to do a gallery, a passage, a tunnel, and has to cross a karst area, they will give it to a geologist, an applied geologist. And normally he will know nothing about karst and caves. And he will just do this tunnel and then find problems and then try and solve them. And then he will realize that probably he needs someone else. Then probably he gets to some karst scientist. It's not in all the places like this. I mean, in Italy, surely it's like this. They never call me to follow a project on a tunnel through a karst area. They just do it and then they have the trouble and then they look for me. In Switzerland, I'm sure the situation is a little bit better. I don't know in Norway or in Portugal. Studying caves is also a very multidisciplinary approach. I mean, you can't study caves in a holistic way only by doing a single thing in geology. I mean, if you are an expert in paleontology, you will specialize in foraminifera. You will be only doing this. You will not be looking at fossils of dinosaurs, foraminifers, and sea urchins. I mean, you become a specialist. Even entomologists are like this. You will be a specialist in spiders, no? You will not be working on Platelminta if you're looking for spiders. No? That's typical of many scientists. A real karst scientist often combines a lot of things. He does a little bit of hydrogeology, a little bit of geochemistry, a little bit of geomorphology. He needs to know something about physics, about whatever. I mean, they know a lot of stuff. In reality, we are crazy people because of this also, because we are very multidisciplinary. And we can ask questions about almost anything because we have dealt with many topics, because we are working on a container, which is the cave, that holds a lot of stuff. Biology, chemistry, whatever, a lot of stuff. So we are very good. So, but what we have to do is have to learn that, to communicate much better our passion, what we are going into the mud as well, no? But try and make people understand how important it is to realize that karst exists. It's an important resource because of the water, because of the science, because of the animals, biodiversity, the bats, a lot of stuff, no? You have to tell them it's important. You have to tell them also it's delicate. It's a very fragile environment. And if we go work on a karst or in a karst environment, we need a karst specialist. We need a caver. We need a cave scientist. Don't do it on your own. You will find trouble, okay? And that's something we have to transfer much better to the whole science community, the geologists, not only, I'm a geologist, so I talk about geology, but and also to the professional people, engineers, geologists, that do a lot of stuff in karst areas, and they do a lot of silly stuff, and then we come in to fix the problems. We should do it otherwise. We should jump in before the trouble comes there, okay? Things are getting better, that's nice, especially because of the International Year of Caves and Karst, which is helping a little bit. And also the virus is extending this to 2022, so we will have a bit more time to talk about it. Now I have to thank really a lot of people. I just put on the slide, so you see a lot of names, especially these very interesting people I had the honor to go caving with and getting muddy with. They explained me a lot of stuff, and without them, I wouldn't have become what I am now, the crazy guy I am now. I'm still crazy, they didn't change this. But I'm a little bit more, I know a little bit more, still crazy, but I know a little bit more. Thanks to all my PhD students, because having PhD students obliges you to learn a lot of things and to read a lot of things and to find and solve a lot of problems, which is very important in a career. And especially to you guys, Marta, Anna, and Stein Erik for organizing all of this, and the courage of inviting a crazy guy like me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe DeVille, for this amazing presentation, really amazing. Thank you for taking us on this incredible journey, and also for challenging and for changing our perspective on this topic.
I don't know if I changed it, but I hope so.
You made us think about it in a new perspective.
That's a good beginning.
Yes, that's great. And it was really amazing following you on this journey and all these caves that you've shown us. So now I invite the people that are attending this webinar, if you have questions, you can ask them on the live chat that you have on your right on your screen. And while we wait, if we have questions from the public, I now give also the floor to Anna Sofia to ask her if you have any comments or any questions.
I do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, for your amazing presentation. We are crazy people, but the good thing about crazy people is that we know all of us, and we can team up with people that are like us. And we definitely are in a love affair with cave mud and cave waters, and that's also part of our essence.
I should have covered myself with mud to have this talk, but anyway.
All right, so when you started talking about cave rivers, I mean, I am not a geologist, as you know, I'm a biologist. I study cave fauna, and this year, within the International Year of Caves and Karst, we launched the Cave Animal of the Year in Portugal. And the cave animal this year are beetles. And for Cave Animal of Portugal, we selected the only cave beetle that lives where? In a cave river.
Yeah, of course.
So we do love rivers very much, cave rivers. So I have two questions, but I will pass now the floor to Stein Erik that has here a question prepared for you, and I will come back later. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and for offering us your amazing perspective on the complex genesis of caves. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you to you. This was a fantastic journey through the world of caves, and I have some comments, and I have a question to you. You say that we are crazy. And of course, it is an advantage to be crazy and know about it yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Because if you are crazy and you don't know about it yourself, it's really bad.
No,
Okay.
but I forget about it. But they continuously say to me that I'm crazy, so I can't forget about it.
No, I understand. But you see, speleology is a passion and it is a science at the same time. And there are many other parts of science where you can have a great passion. You could be a chemist, you could be a biologist or whatever like that. But I think that what we are doing is that we are working in an environment which is quite hostile to most people. And that is why it is so difficult to bring people with you. I think I have, through my career, I've only been able to take maybe less than a handful of my real colleagues underground and show them things which are really interesting to see. But I've brought a lot of students, of course. All the students have been underground and have been in direct connection with the Karst. But
yeah, students can't say no to you.
It is actually quite hard to get people who are just used to stay on the surface underground, you know.
That's true.
But anyway, so I share that with you. But of course we have to do the good science that we are doing, and then publish and whatever, do things with that, which you have done so excellently. And I know that you are writing a book now, and it will be a continuation of the Ford and Williams's book, the next generation of the book, and I think that is a fantastic enterprise. And going back to that, when Derek Ford and Paul Williams wrote the first edition of the book, they were talking about what is the most common cave, And of course, it was the epigenetic river caves, as you have talked about. But I mean, and also we have seen this evolution of ideas, as you have explained as well, where, for instance, Alexander Klimchuk has been an exponent. And Alexander kind of has posed the idea that maybe almost all caves, or many caves, do have a polygenetic origin and may have a hypogenetic origin at all. So my question is now, what do you think is a common cave? What is the most common cave types of today?
It's a void with mud inside.
Yeah.
That was easy to answer.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
No, I really don't know. It depends on where you are. I mean, if you are in the dynamic karst, I mean, many of the caves are made by infiltrating water, of course. So you would talk about epigenic normal caves or river caves, whatever. If you go in places like, I don't know, in the Apennines in Italy, you start finding a lot of hypogenic sulfuric acid and whatever caves. I mean, it depends on where you are. But in many places, I mean, people explain caves in this simple way because they always have heard about caves being formed by surface waters infiltrating, or rivers. And I think it's something wrong. You should start off looking at the cave and seeing how it is made, what the morphologies are, which are the sediments and all this kind of stuff, and try and find out yourself. So not starting from the idea all caves are made by rivers, because then you're just, you don't get it.
Yeah.
Of course, if you follow a river because the cave starts with a river, there's no doubt.
Yeah, of course. But you see, you could have this polygenetic situation. And I was thinking about the caves which I'm working with, the marble caves in strongly metamorphed rocks. And there is a strong overprint of subglacial speleogenesis in it. And maybe with the marbles, most of the hypogenetic history is sealed, because in marbles everything is actually sealed, and you are dependent on brittle deformation relatively late in the history of the rock mass. But still, even up here, if I may say, we can see some signs of hypogenetic effects. So maybe almost all caves do have a hypogenetic history.
Yeah, every cave has its own story. I mean,
yeah, they are individuals.
they're crazy
like
as well.
Like you and I.
Yeah, caves are crazy. That's what make it interesting. Huh? I mean,
yeah. Do we have any questions from people? Other questions?
Not yet, but I think Sofia had a question, right?
Yeah, so I do have actually two questions. The first of all goes very much in the line of the first question of Stein Erik. So I started caving 26 years ago, and despite not being a geologist myself, I have watched the change of perspective of the hypogenetic origin on speleogenesis. So, and I have seen, I mean, reading things from other people, that the percentage of hypogenetic caves, or of our knowledge about hypogenetic caves, has increased significantly. So do we have an updated estimated about the percentage of hypogenic caves compared to hypogenetic? Do we have
it's not easy, because as Stein Erik said, there's a lot of polygenetic caves. I mean, it's not easy to unravel the history of a cave, especially the older ones. So in many caves, maybe there has been hypogene phases in the early genesis of the caves, and you just don't see them anymore. So they're overprinted by epigenic stuff, by rivers, by whatever, I mean. But the estimate I was talking about, 80% of river branchwork caves was the name in Ford and Williams' book. I'm sure it has to go down. But I wouldn't really define caves anymore in real classes like hypogenic, epigenic, and this kind of stuff, because it's much more complicated.
Mm.
All right, so taking from there, so understanding the genesis of a cave is a complicated task, and probably we do have to study caves individually to understand their context and their evolution and development. So my question is slightly broader, and in the sense of this international year of caves in Karst, is how, and just you talk a little bit about that at the end of your presentation, but how can we improve the scientific literacy of cavers that are not geologists on these topics?
Writing booklets for them. I mean, scientists today are pushed, me and Stein-Erik not anymore. He's a little bit at the end of career, but younger ones, they are pushed to publish only in big reviews in English, of course, no? Mm. And this stuff is read only by experts. I mean, it's often seen as a waste of time writing a more popular book, I would say. I was happy to see, for example, Palmer's book. I'm a fan of Palmer. I mean, his book is very good, Cave Geology. But even cave geology is probably too complicated for normal non-geologist cavers. So we probably would need to downgrade it a bit and give a very simple overview of the different ways in which a cave can form and think about it. I mean, it might be a nice idea to do a project in the International Union of Speleology to write something like this. That can be translated in how many languages we have, and written for really basic things. I mean, you can use it for children, for schools and whatever. I have been writing now, and I was very glad of this. They have invited me to write a chapter of a book of Cambridge, I think it is, in America. It will be called Essentials of Geomorphology, or Essentials in Geomorphology, the book. And it's meant for university and for high schools and secondary schools. Yeah. And I made a chapter in this book, and it's probably the first time a chapter will bring together a bit all the ideas of the last 25 years. That would be a nice start from this chapter.
Indeed, and very useful also to communicate these subjects to out of our cavers community.
I think I can pose another comment.
Yeah.
I think when we have talked now and gone through your journey through the world of caves, if you like, the polygenetic aspect is the most stunning. I mean, the most prominent part of this. So maybe now we could tell the cavers who are listening to this that what we really want now is to try to find caves that are monogenetic, that has been formed with only one of these different, one purely hypogenetic, one purely condensation corrosion, and one really only river cave development, and compare them and maybe publish them as examples, type localities or something like that. Maybe that is needed for the further discussion.
Yeah. No, it's easy to do as well, because some of the caves are really emblematic. I mean, Sulfuric Acid Cave, take Lichugria. It's a pure sulfuric acid cave. There's nothing else there. Or a flank margin cave, or a Ukrainian gypsum cave. These are very, that's one process going on, and you see it only, see only the effects of one process. If you go to normal caves, you often find many things that are overlapping. I mean, it becomes difficult.
And we have also progressed a lot in terms of the simulation and doing experiments and things like that, because often when you interpret a cave, you go into it and you make a mental experiment. You think this must be formed by condensation of water, by turbulence or something like that. but the work by Wolfgang Dreibrot and Franzi Gabrocek and all those people have actually progressed quite a bit in terms of, for instance, the condensation corrosion processes and cupola formations and things like that. So it's no longer only mental experiments, but it's underlined by quantitative modeling as well, which is a great advantage.
Yeah. And that's all things that happened in the last 25 years.
Yeah, that's right.
And this helps a lot in understanding processes and seeing the results of these processes in caves.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We are a little bit out of time right now. Thank you so much for offering this amazing perspective and being here today with us. We hope to see you soon. To the people out there at home, stay tuned. The next Cave Show edition will be about cave biology, cave animals, and other types of cave life. Take care and see you in the next